She returned his ring. Publicly he slipped it back on her finger. "Try again, darling." The Marchioness of Hartwell's summer ball was, by universal agreement, the crowning jewel of the London season. 300 candles blazed in crystal chandeliers that had been imported from Venice at ruinous expense. Hothouse roses perfumed the air so thickly that more than one young debutante had been known to swoon, though whether from the flowers or from the presence of so many eligible gentlemen remained a matter of spirited debate among the patronesses of Almack's. Lady Cordelia Blackwood noticed none of it. She stood at the edge of the ballroom, her gloved fingers pressed against the cool silk of her skirts, and watched her fiancé move through the crowd with the easy grace of a man who had been born to command rooms such as this. Lord Sebastian Ashworth, Earl of Thornbury, was speaking with Lord Dashwood near the French doors that led to the garden terrace. His dark head was bent slightly to catch his companion's words, and even from this distance Cordelia could see the sharp intelligence in his grey eyes, the controlled set of his shoulders beneath his perfectly tailored evening coat. He had not looked at her once since they arrived. 3 months, she thought, and the familiar ache bloomed beneath her breastbone. 3 months of an engagement that had been announced in all the papers, discussed in all the drawing-rooms, and dissected by every gossip in the ton. The cold earl and the proud lady, they called them. A practical match if ever there was one. 2 people too sensible for romantic nonsense, too bruised by life to believe in fairy stories. They were not wrong about the practical part, at least. Cordelia's mother had wept with relief when Sebastian made his offer, had clutched Cordelia's hands and spoken of salvation, of security, of finally being able to sleep without fearing the knock of creditors at the door. And Cordelia, worn down by 4 seasons of refusing fortune hunters and impoverished second sons, exhausted by the constant pretense that the Blackwood finances were anything but desperate, had said yes. She had told herself it was sensible. She had told herself that Lord Thornbury was a good man beneath his reserve, that she could be content with mutual respect and comfortable silence, that love was a luxury she could no longer afford to demand. She had been a fool. "Cordelia, darling, you simply must smile." Her mother appeared at her elbow. Lady Blackwood's own smile stretched so wide it threatened to crack the careful powder on her cheeks. "People are watching. They are always watching." "Let them watch, mamma." Cordelia did not turn from her study of Sebastian. "They will anyway, whether I smile or not." "Yes, but they will talk less if you appear happy." Lady Blackwood's fingers fluttered to the pearls at her throat, the paste pearls, though only Cordelia knew they had sold the real ones 2 years ago. "You are engaged to an earl, my love, the Countess of Thornbury. Think of what that means for our family, for your future." "I know what it means, mamma." What it meant was that in less than 2 months she would stand before God and promise to love, honour, and obey a man who had never once spoken to her of anything but weather, estate management, and the upcoming session of Parliament. A man who touched her hand with perfect propriety and absolutely no warmth. A man who looked at her sometimes in unguarded moments she had learned to treasure and despise in equal measure, as if he wanted to say something important, something true, before the shutters came down and he became once again the cold, controlled earl that society expected. She was in love with him. The realization had crept up on her slowly, a thief in the night of her practical intentions. She had not meant to notice the way his rare smiles transformed his face, softening the stern lines around his mouth and making him look almost boyish. She had not meant to feel her heart stutter when he handed her into his carriage, his grip firm and sure through the thin silk of her gloves. She had not meant to lie awake at night wondering what it would be like to be kissed by him, truly kissed, not the chaste salute to her knuckles that propriety permitted. But she had noticed, she had felt, she had wondered, and now she was trapped in an engagement with a man who felt nothing for her at all. "There you are!" A bright voice cut through Cordelia's dark thoughts, and she turned to find her cousin Arabella weaving toward them through the crowd. At 17, Arabella Finch possessed the kind of fresh-faced prettiness that made young men write terrible poetry, all golden curls and blue eyes, and a smile that seemed perpetually on the verge of laughter. She was also, Cordelia had learned during 3 months of chaperoning her through the season, genuinely kind-hearted and desperately naive, a combination that required constant vigilance. "I have been looking everywhere for you," Arabella said breathlessly. "Mr. Ashworth has asked if he might claim my hand for the supper dance, and I wanted to be certain you approved before I accepted." Cordelia softened, despite herself. Thomas Ashworth was Sebastian's younger brother, a pleasant young man of 23 who blushed whenever Arabella spoke to him, and who had been paying increasingly obvious court to her for the past several weeks. Unlike his brother, Thomas wore his heart openly on his sleeve, and Cordelia had found his transparent admiration for Arabella rather endearing. "You may accept," she said, "but you must dance the 2 sets before supper with other partners. We would not wish to give the appearance of particular attachment before a formal understanding has been reached." Arabella's face fell slightly before rallying into a determined smile. "Of course. You are quite right. I shall save supper for Mr. Ashworth and distribute my other dances with perfect propriety." She hesitated, worrying her lower lip. "Do you think, that is to say, do you believe Mr. Ashworth has intentions? Honourable ones, I mean?" "I believe," Cordelia said carefully, "that Mr. Ashworth is a good man from a good family, and that he seems to hold you in genuine esteem. Beyond that I cannot say. Such things take time to develop. But you and Lord Thornbury are a practical match." The words came out sharper than Cordelia intended. "Not a love story for young ladies to emulate." Arabella's eyes widened with hurt surprise, and Cordelia immediately regretted her tone. Before she could apologize, however, her mother was steering Arabella toward a cluster of young men who had been eyeing her hopefully, and Cordelia was left alone once more with her bitter thoughts. She looked back toward the French doors. Sebastian was still there, still speaking with Lord Dashwood, but something in his posture had shifted. He stood straighter, more rigid, and there was a tension in his shoulders that had not been there before. Dashwood was speaking intently, gesturing with his champagne glass, and Sebastian's face had gone utterly blank, the expression Cordelia had learned to recognize as his most impenetrable mask. She should not eavesdrop. It was rude, improper, and beneath the dignity of a lady of her station. She was walking toward them before she had consciously decided to move. The crowd parted easily for her, one advantage of being engaged to a man whom most of society found vaguely terrifying, and she slowed her approach as she drew near the French doors, pretending to examine a display of roses while straining to hear the low murmur of masculine voices. "Cannot be surprised by the gossip," Dashwood was saying. "Half the ton expected you to marry Lady Helena when she came out of mourning. The Whitmore fortune would have solved everything, old boy, and everyone knew the 2 of you had an understanding before. That understanding ended 3 years ago." Sebastian's voice was flat, colourless. "By her choice, as I recall." "Yes, well, circumstances have changed, haven't they? She's a wealthy widow now, and you're engaged to a woman whose family can barely afford candles for their own drawing-room. People talk, Sebastian. They wonder why a man in your position would choose a practical arrangement over— is that what they call it?" Something flickered in Sebastian's tone, amusement perhaps, or something darker. "A practical arrangement? What else would they call it?" Dashwood laughed, the sound grating against Cordelia's ears. "You've made no secret of your intentions. A bride with the proper connections and enough beauty to breed handsome heirs, nothing more. No romantic illusions, no messy emotions. Exactly what you required after Helena made such a spectacle of breaking things off. Yes. Sebastian's voice was quiet now, almost contemplative. Exactly what I required. Cordelia did not hear the rest. The blood was rushing in her ears, drowning out the music and the chatter and the clink of champagne glasses, drowning out everything except those words echoing in her skull like a death knell. A practical arrangement. No romantic illusions. Exactly what I required. She had known, of course. She had always known. But knowing something in the abstract was very different from hearing your fiancé confirm it to his friend in tones of such casual indifference, as if the question of whether he cared for his future wife was barely worth discussing. Her hand went to the ring on her left hand before she was aware of moving. The sapphire caught the candlelight, blue fire trapped in a circle of gold, and she remembered the day Sebastian had placed it on her finger. His face had been carefully neutral, his words precisely correct. I hope you will do me the honor of wearing this as a symbol of our understanding, not our love, not our future, our understanding. Well, she understood now. She understood with brutal, devastating clarity. She was nothing more than a convenient solution to a problem, a well-bred vessel for heirs, a placeholder until he could figure out whether Lady Helena, whoever Lady Helena was, might be convinced to take him back now that she had a wealthy widow's freedom to choose as she pleased. Cordelia turned away from the French doors before Sebastian could notice her standing there. Her face felt strange, stiff, as if it belonged to someone else. Her heart was beating too fast, and her corset suddenly seemed to be laced far too tight, making it difficult to draw breath. She would not cry. She would not cause a scene. She was Lady Cordelia Blackwood, daughter of a viscount, and she had endured 4 years of near poverty with her head held high. She could certainly endure this. But she could not. She would not continue in an engagement that meant nothing to him and was slowly destroying her. The realization settled over her like a shroud, heavy and final. She had to end this. Tonight. Before she lost what remained of her courage. Before she spent another sleepless night imagining a future that would never exist. Before she became just another piece of furniture in Sebastian Ashworth's carefully ordered life. Her mother would be devastated. The gossip would be vicious. Society would whisper that she had thrown away her only chance at a respectable match, that pride had once again triumphed over sense, that the Blackwood women were destined to end their days in genteel obscurity. Let them whisper. Let them laugh. She would rather be a spinster or a governess or a companion to some elderly aunt than spend her life loving a man who saw her as nothing more than a practical arrangement. Cordelia's fingers closed around the ring. The metal was warm from her skin, and for one terrible moment she felt the ghost of Sebastian's touch as he had slipped it onto her finger 3 months ago. Had she imagined the slight tremor in his hands? Had she invented the way his eyes had softened as he looked at her? Had she conjured an entire fantasy of hidden depths and suppressed emotions because she so desperately wanted to believe that there was more to him than the cold facade he presented to the world? It did not matter now. Whatever he felt or did not feel, she could not survive another day of pretending that her heart was not breaking. She looked across the ballroom and found him immediately, as if some invisible thread connected them even now. He had left Lord Dashwood and was making his way toward the dance floor, probably looking for her to claim the set they had promised each other earlier in the evening. His dark hair gleamed in the candlelight, and his grey eyes swept the room with that cool, assessing gaze that had first caught her attention at a musicale 9 months ago. I could have loved you, she thought, and the pain of it nearly buckled her knees. I do love you, God help me, but I will not be your practical arrangement. She began to walk toward him. The crowd seemed to part before her, guests stepping aside with curious glances that Cordelia neither noticed nor cared about. Her vision had narrowed to a single point. Sebastian's face, turning toward her as he sensed her approach, his eyebrows drawing together in the faintest suggestion of a frown. "Cordelia," he said her name like a question, and something in his voice made her falter for just a moment. "Is something wrong? You look— I need to speak with you." "Of course." He reached for her arm, the automatic gesture of a gentleman toward his intended. "Shall we find somewhere private?" "No." The word came out louder than she intended, and she saw heads turning in her peripheral vision. "Good. Let them see. Let them all see. This will not take long, and I see no reason to hide what I have to say." Sebastian's expression flickered surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of alarm before settling into careful blankness. "Very well. What is it you wish to discuss?" Cordelia pulled off her glove, tugging at the fingers with short, sharp movements that spoke of barely controlled emotion. She felt the ring loose on her finger now that the fabric no longer held it in place, and she gripped it before it could slip away on its own. "I am returning this." She held up the sapphire, and she heard the murmur ripple through the crowd around them. "I am releasing you from our engagement, Lord Thornbury. You are free to pursue whatever practical arrangements you deem more suitable." The silence that fell was absolute. 300 people seemed to be holding their breath, and Cordelia could feel the weight of their stares like physical pressure against her skin. Somewhere behind her, she heard her mother make a small, strangled sound of horror. Sebastian did not move. He stood perfectly still, the ring glittering between them, and for a long moment his face betrayed nothing at all. Then, so slowly that it seemed almost dreamlike, he reached out and took her hand. Not the ring. Her hand. His fingers were warm and steady as they closed around hers, and Cordelia's breath caught in her throat as he gently pried her fingers open, plucked the sapphire from her palm, and slid it back onto her finger with deliberate precision. "Try again, darling." His voice was pitched low, meant for her ears alone, but in the hush of the ballroom it carried clearly. "Perhaps somewhere more private, where we can discuss whatever nonsense has gotten into your head." Cordelia stared at him, too stunned to speak. This was not how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to accept the ring with cold dignity, perhaps make some cutting remark about her dramatics, perhaps simply turn and walk away. He was not supposed to be looking at her like that, with something fierce and desperate flickering behind his careful mask. "I am not. This is not nonsense." "No." Sebastian's grip on her hand tightened almost imperceptibly. "Then you will have no objection to explaining yourself while we dance." Before she could protest, before she could pull away, before she could do anything at all, he had placed her hand on his arm and was guiding her toward the dance floor. The orchestra, sensing the drama with the instinct of seasoned performers, struck up a waltz. And then she was in his arms. Sebastian danced beautifully. She had known that from their first dance together, a country set at Lady Pemberton's garden party that had left her breathless and annoyed in equal measure. But this was different. This was a waltz, intimate and close, and his hand at her waist felt like a brand even through the layers of her gown. "Now," he said, as they swept into the first turn, "would you care to explain why you have just attempted to humiliate me in front of the entire ton?" The cold fury in his voice struck her like a slap. "Humiliate you? I was trying to— To what? Cause a scandal that will follow us both for years? Give the gossips something to whisper about for the rest of the season?" His grey eyes blazed down at her. "My God, Cordelia, if you wanted to end our engagement, you might have had the courtesy to do so in private." "The way Lady Helena did?" Sebastian's step faltered just for a moment before he recovered. His face had gone pale beneath its usual tan. "What do you know about Helena?" "I know she jilted you." Cordelia was too hurt, too angry,
too desperately in love with him to guard her tongue. "I know she threw you over publicly when your father's debts became known. I know that's why you proposed to me, because you wanted a practical arrangement with no romantic illusions, exactly what you required after Helena made such a spectacle of things." Something in Sebastian's expression shifted, cracked, revealed a glimpse of raw pain before he shuttered it away. "You were listening." "I was." She lifted her chin, refusing to apologize. "And I heard enough to understand exactly what I am to you. A solution to a problem. A convenient bride with the proper connections, and enough beauty to breed handsome heirs. Nothing more." "That's what you heard? That's what you said? That's what I—" He broke off, his jaw clenching so tightly she could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. "That's what Dashwood said. That's what society believes. That is not—" Again he stopped, and she saw him wrestle with something, some internal battle that played out in the tension of his shoulders and the white-knuckled grip of his hand on hers. "That is not what?" she demanded. "That is not how you truly feel? Then tell me, Sebastian. For once in your life, tell me something real." The waltz swirled them past a cluster of wide-eyed matrons, past Lord Dashwood's startled face, past her mother's tearful one. Cordelia was aware of all of them, watching, judging, cataloguing every moment of this disaster for future retelling. She did not care. "Tell me," she whispered. "Tell me what you feel." Sebastian looked at her for a long, endless moment. The music soared around them, and his hand at her waist drew her imperceptibly closer, and she could see something in his eyes that made her heart stutter with desperate hope. Then the shutters came down. "I feel," he said quietly, "that we should continue this conversation somewhere private. Tomorrow, when we have both had time to collect ourselves." The hope died as quickly as it had bloomed. Of course he would not speak, would not open himself to her, would not give her even a crumb of real emotion to sustain her through the wreckage of her heart. "There is nothing to discuss," she said, and was proud of how steady her voice sounded. "I have said what I needed to say, and I have refused to accept it." The waltz was slowing now, the final strains fading into silence. Sebastian held her in place as the music ended, his grey eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "The ring stays on your finger, Cordelia. You are my fiancée, and you will remain so until we have spoken properly. Do you understand? You cannot simply—" "I can." His voice was soft, implacable. "I have. Try to remove that ring again, and I will put it back as many times as necessary." Something flickered across his face. Frustration, perhaps, or something more complicated. "Whatever you think you heard, whatever conclusions you have drawn, you are wrong, and I will prove it to you, if you give me the chance." "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it, raw and aching with everything she was trying so hard not to feel. "Why does it matter to you whether I stay or go, if I am nothing but a practical arrangement?" Sebastian's hand tightened convulsively on hers. For one breathless moment, she thought he would finally say something true, something that would change everything. Instead, he released her and stepped back, his expression once again a mask of aristocratic composure. "Because I do not accept defeat," he said coolly, "and I do not allow others to make decisions for me. We will speak tomorrow at 3:00. I will call on you at your mother's house." He bowed over her hand with perfect propriety, turned on his heel, and walked away, without a backward glance. Cordelia stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by 300 staring guests, her heart pounding, and her eyes burning with unshed tears. The sapphire ring glittered on her finger, warm from his touch, a shackle she had not chosen, and could not seem to escape. She was still his fiancée, and despite everything, despite the humiliation, despite the unanswered questions, despite the certainty that she was nothing to him but a convenient solution, a small, traitorous part of her soul was glad. Cordelia. Her mother materialized at her elbow, gripping her arm with fingers that trembled. "What have you done? What were you thinking? The entire ton saw everyone will talk. Let them talk, Mamma." Cordelia's voice sounded strange to her own ears, hollow and distant. "They will anyway. But the engagement is apparently still intact." She looked down at the ring on her finger, at the deep blue sapphire that Sebastian had chosen himself, refusing to give her some anonymous family heirloom. "I wanted something that suited you," he had said at the time, "something with fire in it." She had cherished those words, foolish romantic that she was. She had read meaning into them that was never there. "Oh, thank God!" Lady Blackwood pressed a hand to her heart, tears streaming down her powdered cheeks. "Thank God. I thought when you took off the ring, I thought everything was ruined. I thought we would be back on the streets. I thought... Mamma." Cordelia gently extracted herself from her mother's grip. "I need some air. Will you check on Arabella? Make sure she has partners for the next few sets." "But you cannot leave the ballroom alone. The scandal..." "The scandal has already happened." Cordelia was already moving toward the terrace doors, desperate for escape. A few minutes of fresh air will hardly make things worse. She did not wait for her mother's reply. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the whispers that followed in her wake, and stepped out into the cool night air. The terrace was blissfully empty. Cordelia walked to the stone balustrade and gripped it with both hands, letting the cold seep into her overheated skin. Below her, the Hartwell Gardens stretched out in shadowy splendor, paths winding between beds of roses and carefully trimmed hedges. She was shaking, she realized, fine tremors running through her body that she could not seem to control. "Try again, darling." She had never heard him use an endearment before. In 3 months of engagement, he had called her Lady Cordelia, then Cordelia, then in private simply "my dear," in tones of distant politeness. Never darling, never anything that suggested genuine affection. But tonight, in front of everyone, with his grey eyes blazing and his hand gentle on hers, he had called her darling. It meant nothing, she told herself fiercely. It was a performance for the crowd, a way to deflect the scandal she had caused. He was protecting his pride, nothing more. He had said himself that he did not accept defeat. Whatever you think you heard, you are wrong. But she had heard what she heard. Practical arrangement, no romantic illusions, exactly what he required. Had she misunderstood? Was there some other interpretation of those words, that she was too hurt, too blinded by her own assumptions, to see? "And I will prove it to you, if you give me the chance." Prove what? That he cared for her? That their engagement was more than a business transaction dressed up in silk and sapphires? She wanted to believe it. God help her, she wanted to believe it so badly that she could feel the wanting like a physical ache in her chest. But Sebastian had never given her any reason to believe. 3 months of careful distance, of polite conversation, of walls so high she could not see over them. 3 months of telling herself that surely, there was more to him than this, only to hear him confirm her worst fears to his friend. The terrace door opened behind her. Cordelia did not turn. She knew, with a certainty that defied logic, who was standing there. She could feel his presence like a change in the air pressure, like a storm building on the horizon. "I told you," she said without looking at him, "that I needed air, not company. And I told you that we would speak tomorrow." Sebastian's footsteps approached, slow and measured, until he stood beside her at the balustrade.
But it seems I cannot wait that long. Then speak. She kept her eyes fixed on the darkened garden. Say whatever you came to say. Silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sound of music from the ballroom and the chirping of crickets in the hedges below. Cordelia could feel him looking at her, could feel the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. I handled tonight poorly, he said finally. I should not have the way I spoke to Dashwood. I did not know you were listening. Would you have said something different if you had? Another pause. I don't know. At least it was honest. She turned to look at him, and found his face half in shadow, his expression impossible to read. Then what would you have me believe, Sebastian? That you have been hiding some grand passion behind that mask of yours, that you proposed to me for reasons other than practical advantage? I proposed to you, he said slowly, because you were the only woman I had met in 3 years who made me want to lower my guard. The only one who looked at me and saw something other than a title and a fortune or the lack thereof. The only one who spoke to me as if I were a human being rather than a prize to be won or a disappointment to be avoided. Cordelia's heart stuttered. Then why? Because I am afraid. The words seemed to be torn from him against his will. Because the last time I allowed myself to care for someone, she destroyed me in front of everyone I knew. Because I swore I would never give anyone that power over me again, and then you walked into Lady Pemberton's musicale with your sharp tongue and your stubborn pride, and I— He broke off, his jaw clenching. I have not handled this well, any of it. I know that. Sebastian, let me finish. He turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight she could see that his careful mask had cracked, revealing something raw and uncertain beneath. What you heard tonight, what I said to Dashwood, that was the story I tell myself, the story I tell everyone. It is easier to pretend that I chose you for practical reasons than to admit that I— Again, he stopped, and she watched him struggle with words that clearly did not come easily. That you what? But he was already pulling back, already rebuilding the walls she had glimpsed behind. Tomorrow, he said. We will speak properly tomorrow, when I have had time to think about what I want to say. Sebastian, please. Tomorrow. He reached out and touched her cheek, just for a moment, his fingertips brushing her skin so lightly she might have imagined it. Whatever else you believe about me, believe this. I am not ready to let you go. I may never be ready. And if that makes me a selfish bastard, then so be it. He turned and walked back toward the ballroom, leaving Cordelia alone on the terrace, with her heart pounding and her thoughts in chaos. She looked down at the ring on her finger, at the sapphire that glowed like captured moonlight. I am not ready to let you go. It was not a declaration of love. It was not even an explanation. But it was something. Something more than she had ever expected from the cold, controlled Earl of Thornbury. And God help her, it was enough to make her want to stay. The terrace door closed behind him, and Cordelia pressed her hand to her chest, as if she could physically contain the hope that was blooming there despite her best efforts to crush it. Tomorrow, he had said. Tomorrow they would speak properly. Tomorrow, perhaps, she would finally learn whether her heart was safe in Sebastian Ashworth's keeping, or whether loving him would destroy her completely. She did not know which outcome frightened her more. The clock in the drawing-room had been ticking for exactly 47 minutes past 3 o'clock, and Sebastian had not come. Cordelia sat in the chair nearest the window, her needlework untouched in her lap, watching the street below with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Every carriage that passed made her heart lurch. Every gentleman's figure on the pavement drew her forward in her seat, before disappointment settled back into her bones.
He was not coming. Perhaps he was delayed, her mother offered from across the room, where she had been pretending to read the same page of her novel for the past half-hour. Gentlemen have many demands on their time. Business matters, estate concerns. He is not coming.
Mamma! Cordelia set aside her embroidery hoop with careful precision, refusing to let her hands tremble. Whatever he intended to say last night, he has clearly thought better of it in the cold light of day. You cannot know that. I know that Lord Thornbury is never late. Cordelia rose from her chair and moved to stand before the empty fireplace, needing something to look at besides the treacherous street. In 3 months of acquaintance, he has arrived precisely on time for every engagement, every outing, every call. He is late today because he does not wish to come at all. The admission hurt more than she had expected. After everything that had passed between them on the terrace, the raw honesty in his voice, the fleeting touch of his fingers on her cheek, those words that had kept her awake half the night she had allowed herself to hope. Foolish. She was always foolish where Sebastian Ashworth was concerned. A knock sounded at the front door, and Cordelia's heart stopped entirely for 3 painful beats before it resumed at twice its normal speed. She heard the butler's measured tread in the hallway, the murmur of voices, and then, Mr. Thomas Ashworth to see Lady Cordelia and Lady Blackwood. Not Sebastian, his younger brother. Cordelia composed her features into pleasant neutrality as Thomas entered the drawing-room, hat in hand, looking rather like a golden retriever that had been caught digging in the garden. He had Sebastian's height, but none of his imposing presence, his features softer and more open, his brown eyes filled with obvious discomfort. "Lady Cordelia, Lady Blackwood." He bowed to each of them in turn. "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all, Mr. Ashworth." Lady Blackwood rose to greet him with the warmth she reserved for any member of a titled family. "You are always welcome. May I offer you tea?" "No, thank you. I cannot stay long." Thomas twisted his hat in his hands, a nervous gesture that reminded Cordelia painfully of Arabella. "I came to deliver a message from my brother." The words landed like stones in the pit of Cordelia's stomach. A message. Not Sebastian himself, but a message carried by proxy. She knew what was coming with sudden, terrible certainty. "I see." Her voice emerged steady, a small miracle. "And what message does Lord Thornbury wish to convey?" Thomas looked even more uncomfortable, if such a thing were possible. "He asked me to extend his sincere apologies for missing your appointment today. He was called away on urgent business this morning, a matter regarding our estates in Hampshire that could not wait. He expects to be away from London for at least a week, possibly longer." A week. He had fled London rather than face her. "How unfortunate," Cordelia said. "I hope the matter is not too serious." "I do not believe so. Something about tenant disputes and drainage issues." Thomas hesitated, then added in a rush, "He also asked me to assure you that your engagement stands and that he will call upon you immediately when he returns." How reassuring. Something in her tone must have betrayed her, because Thomas's expression shifted from discomfort to something closer to sympathy. "Lady Cordelia, if I may speak frankly, Mr. Ashworth, there is no need. My brother is an idiot." The declaration was so unexpected that Cordelia actually laughed, a startled sound that seemed to surprise them both. Lady Blackwood made a small noise of protest, but Thomas pressed on, his words tumbling over each other in his eagerness to be heard. He is brilliant at managing estates and navigating Parliament and terrifying people who deserve to be terrified. But when it comes to matters of the heart, he is an absolute idiot. He has been since Lady Helena." Thomas caught himself wincing.
I should not have mentioned that. I already know about Lady Helena, Cordelia said quietly. Your brother told me last night that she destroyed him publicly. I take it the destruction was quite thorough. Thomas's handsome face darkened with uncharacteristic anger. She was a snake, a beautiful, calculating snake who wanted Sebastian's title and turned vicious when his fortune proved less impressive than she had assumed. She announced her intention to break their engagement at a dinner party, stood up in front of 30 guests, and declared that she could never marry a man who would expect her to economize. Then she laughed about it, as if his humiliation were the most delightful joke she had ever heard. Cordelia felt something twist in her chest, not quite sympathy, not yet, but the beginnings of understanding. That must have been devastating for him. It nearly killed him. Not the loss of Helena, I think he knew by then what she truly was, but the public nature of it. The whispers that followed him everywhere. The way people looked at him as if he were something pitiable. Thomas shook his head. Sebastian was different before that, warmer. He used to laugh, used to let people see who he really was. After Helena, he just closed off. Built walls so high that I sometimes wonder if even he remembers what's behind them. Then why did he propose to me? The question emerged before Cordelia could stop it. If he is so determined never to be vulnerable again, why risk another engagement at all? Thomas was quiet for a moment, his brown eyes thoughtful. Because you are nothing like Helena. Because when he looks at you, I see something in his face that I have not seen in years. Because for all his talk of practical arrangements and sensible matches, my brother is desperately in love with you and too terrified to admit it. The words hit Cordelia like a physical blow. She gripped the mantelpiece to steady herself, aware that her mother was watching with barely concealed hope, aware that Thomas was waiting for some response, aware that her heart was beating so hard it seemed to shake her entire body. "You cannot know that," she whispered. "He has never said, Sebastian." "Never says anything that matters. That is precisely the problem." Thomas stepped closer, his expression earnest. "But I know my brother, Lady Cordelia. I have watched him watch you when he thinks no one is looking. I have heard him speak of you with a warmth he has not shown to anyone in years. And I saw his face last night after your confrontation on the terrace. He looked like a man who had just been offered everything he ever wanted and was too afraid to reach out and take it. If he cared for me, he would be here. He would not have fled to Hampshire. He fled to Hampshire because he has no idea how to do this, how to open himself up again, how to risk being hurt, how to tell a woman he loves her when the last time he tried she destroyed him in front of everyone he knew." Thomas's voice was gentle but insistent. "Give him time, Lady Cordelia. Do not give up on him yet." Cordelia closed her eyes, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions she could not begin to sort through. Hope and fear and anger and longing all tangled together in a knot that seemed to tighten with every breath. "I do not know if I can," she admitted. "I do not know how much longer I can endure this uncertainty. Loving someone who refuses to love me back, or who loves me but will not say so, I am not certain which is worse." Thomas reached out and took her hand, with a presumption that would have been shocking if his intentions had not been so clearly fraternal. "1 week," he said. "Give him 1 week to sort himself out. And if he returns and still cannot tell you how he feels, then I will personally help you pack your things and escape to the continent." Despite everything, Cordelia found herself smiling. "You are a good man, Mr. Ashworth. Your brother does not deserve you." "No, he does not. But I keep him around anyway. Someone has to make sure he does not ruin the best thing that has ever happened to him." Thomas released her hand and stepped back, retrieving his hat from the table where he had set it. "I should go. Miss Finch was hoping I might call this afternoon, and I find myself strangely reluctant to disappoint her." Cordelia felt a genuine warmth bloom through the anxiety in her chest. Arabella is in the blue parlour, practising her watercolours. I am certain she would welcome a visitor. Then I shall impose upon your hospitality a moment longer. Thomas bowed again, his smile bright and uncomplicated in a way that his brother's never was. Thank you for hearing me out, Lady Cordelia, and please do not lose hope. Sebastian is worth waiting for, even if he makes the waiting insufferably difficult. He departed for the blue parlour, leaving Cordelia alone with her mother and the heavy silence of unspoken questions. "Well," Lady Blackwood said after a long moment, "that was rather illuminating." "Yes." Cordelia sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. "I suppose it was." "Do you believe him? About Lord Thornbury's feelings?" Cordelia considered the question carefully, turning it over in her mind like a stone whose facets she had not yet fully examined. "I believe Thomas believes it. Whether that makes it true, you love him." It was not a question. Her mother's voice was soft, almost wondering. "I thought when you accepted his proposal, I assumed it was for the security, for the position. But you love him." "I love him." The admission came easier than she had expected, perhaps because there was no longer any point in denying it. "I did not mean to. I knew it was foolish. Knew that he would never feel the same. Knew that I was only setting myself up for heartbreak. But somewhere between our first dance and our 20th conversation about estate management, I fell in love with him anyway." Lady Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. Then she rose from her chair and crossed the room to sit beside her daughter, taking Cordelia's hands in her own, with a tenderness that reminded Cordelia sharply of childhood, of scraped knees and broken toys, and the certainty that her mother could fix anything. "Your father was a difficult man to love," Lady Blackwood said. "Proud and stubborn and so convinced that he knew best about everything. Half the time I wanted to strangle him, and the other half I wanted to kiss him until neither of us could breathe." Cordelia blinked at this unexpected revelation. Her parents' marriage had always seemed distant to her, a matter of courtesy and convenience rather than passion. "I did not know. I learned to hide it. After he died, it seemed easier not to speak of what we had been to each other, easier to focus on practical matters, on ensuring our survival." Her mother's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But I loved him, Cordelia, desperately and completely. And I believe I hoped that he loved me too, even if he was never very good at saying so." "Mamma." "What I am trying to tell you," Lady Blackwood continued, squeezing her daughter's hands, "is that love is rarely easy, especially not love for proud, stubborn men who do not know how to speak their hearts. But it is worth fighting for, if the man is worth having." She paused, searching Cordelia's face. "Is Lord Thornbury worth having?" Cordelia thought of Sebastian's rare smiles, of the way his eyes softened when he thought no one was watching, of his gentle patience with Thomas and his careful courtesy to Arabella. She thought of the man on the terrace who had admitted to being afraid, who had touched her cheek as if she were something precious, who had said he was not ready to let her go. "Yes," she said, "I believe he is." "Then wait for him. Give him the week his brother asked for, and when he returns, make him tell you the truth one way or another." Lady Blackwood smiled a little sadly. "Life is too short for uncertainty, my darling. I learned that lesson too late. Do not make my mistakes." Cordelia leaned forward and embraced her mother, feeling the delicate bones beneath her silk gown, smelling the familiar lavender of her perfume. "Thank you, Mamma." "For what?" "For understanding. For not being angry about last night. For—" She pulled back, smiling through the tears that had begun to slip down her cheeks. for being my mother." Lady Blackwood cupped her daughter's face in her hands, brushing away the tears with gentle thumbs. "I am always your mother, even when you are being impossibly dramatic in the middle of the season's most important ball." Cordelia laughed, and for the first time since the previous night, the weight on her chest began to ease. The week stretched into 10 days, and still Sebastian did not return. Cordelia filled the time as best she could, chaperoning Arabella to teas and musicales, calling on acquaintances who pretended not to have heard about the scene at the Hartwell ball, suffering through her mother's attempts at optimistic conversation. Thomas called every other day, ostensibly to court Arabella, but always finding time to reassure Cordelia that his brother would return soon, that the estate matters were more complicated than expected, that Sebastian sent his regards, as if she were a distant relation rather than the woman he was supposed to marry. On the 11th day, an invitation arrived that made Cordelia's heart sink to her slippers. "The Countess of Hartwell requests the pleasure of your company at a house party," her mother read aloud, "to be held at Hartwell Manor in Surrey from the 15th to the 22nd of July. Activities will include riding, archery, a midsummer ball, and various entertainments." She looked up, her expression a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Everyone will be there, Cordelia, the entire ton." "Everyone including Lord Thornbury?" Lady Blackwood consulted the invitation again. "It does not say specifically, but the Hartwells are particular friends of the Ashworth family. It would be unusual for him not to attend." Which meant that after 11 days of silence, Cordelia might finally see Sebastian again, surrounded by the same gossips who had witnessed her attempt to return his ring. The prospect was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. "We must accept," Lady Blackwood declared. "We have no choice. To refuse would be to admit defeat, to suggest that you are hiding in shame. We must show society that your engagement is as strong as ever." "Is it?" Cordelia murmured, but she knew her mother was right. They would go to the house party. They would hold their heads high. And somehow she would find a way to speak with Sebastian without falling apart entirely. They departed for Surrey 4 days later, their carriage making the journey in a little over 3 hours. Hartwell Manor was a sprawling Georgian estate set amid rolling hills and ancient oak forests, its honey-coloured stone glowing in the late afternoon sunlight. As they approached the house, Cordelia could see other carriages already assembled on the circular drive, their occupants being escorted inside by an army of liveried footmen. "Deep breaths," her mother advised as they waited their turn to disembark. "Smile as if you have not a care in the world, and for heaven's sake do not cause any scenes." "I shall endeavour to contain my dramatic impulses, mamma." They were greeted in the entrance hall by Lady Hartwell herself, a formidable woman in her 60s, whose social influence rivaled that of the patronesses of Almack's. Her keen eyes swept over Cordelia with obvious interest. "Lady Cordelia, how delightful that you could join us." The words were pleasant enough, but there was a knowing glint in her gaze that suggested she was anticipating entertainment. "Lord Thornbury arrived yesterday. I am certain he will be pleased to see you." Cordelia's heart stuttered. He was here, already here. She would see him within the hour, perhaps within minutes. "I look forward to renewing our acquaintance," she managed, grateful that her voice remained steady. Lady Hartwell's smile sharpened. "I have placed you in the east wing, near the portrait gallery. Dinner is at 8. I do hope you will find your accommodations satisfactory." They were escorted to their rooms, modest but comfortable chambers, overlooking the rose garden, and Cordelia immediately set about preparing for dinner. She chose her gown with more care than usual, selecting a deep green silk that brought out the colour of her eyes and complemented the sapphire ring she still wore on her left hand. Sebastian's ring. She had not removed it since he slid it back onto her finger at the Hartwell ball. though she had been tempted more than once during the endless days of his absence. When she descended to the drawing-room where guests were gathering before dinner, she saw him immediately. He stood near the windows, a glass of wine in his hand, deep in conversation with an older gentleman Cordelia did not recognize. He wore black evening clothes that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean elegance of his figure. His dark hair was impeccably styled, his posture perfect, his expression as unreadable as ever. Then he looked up and saw her. Something flickered across his face, relief, longing, fear, before it was smoothed away into careful blankness. He excused himself from his conversation and began to make his way across the room toward her. But before he could reach her side, another figure intercepted him. She was beautiful. That was Cordelia's first thought, immediately followed by a sinking certainty about the woman's identity. Golden hair piled in elaborate curls, blue eyes that sparkled with practiced charm, a figure draped in pale pink silk that showed off a diamond necklace worth more than the Blackwood townhouse. Lady Helena Whitmore. No Lady Helena Crawford now, Cordelia remembered. The Countess of Crawford, recently widowed and apparently determined to reclaim what she had once discarded. "Sebastian, darling," Lady Helena's voice carried across the room with the ease of someone accustomed to being heard. "How wonderful to see you again. It has been far too long." Sebastian's expression did not change, but Cordelia saw the tension that tightened his shoulders. "Lady Crawford, I was not aware you would be attending." "Were you not? How delightful. I do love surprises." She placed a familiar hand on his arm, leaning close enough that Cordelia could smell her perfume from across the room. "We have so much to discuss, you and I. Perhaps we might find a private moment after dinner." "I am engaged this evening." "Tomorrow, then. Surely you can spare a few moments for an old friend." Her smile was honey-sweet and sharp as glass. "We were such particular friends once, after all." Cordelia had heard enough. She turned away from the spectacle, her stomach churning with jealousy and uncertainty, and nearly collided with Thomas Ashworth. "Lady Cordelia." Thomas caught her elbow to steady her, his face grim. "I see you have noticed our unwelcome guest. She is rather difficult to overlook." Lady Hartwell invited her at the last moment, apparently hoping for drama to enliven her party. Thomas's lip curled with disgust. "Helena has been circling Sebastian since she arrived, making it clear to everyone that she intends to win him back now that she is free and wealthy." "And does Sebastian wish to be won?" Thomas looked at her steadily. "What do you think?" Cordelia did not know what she thought. She did not know anything any more, except that her heart was aching and her pride was in tatters, and she wanted nothing more than to flee back to London and never see any of these people again. "I think," she said carefully, "that I am tired of guessing. I am tired of hoping and doubting and waiting for a man who cannot seem to decide what he wants. If Sebastian wishes to resume his association with Lady Helena, he is welcome to it. I will not stand in his way. Cordelia, Miss Finch is looking for you." She nodded toward the opposite corner of the room, where Arabella stood with Lady Blackwood, casting hopeful glances in Thomas's direction. "You should go to her." Thomas hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but Arabella chose that moment to catch his eye and smile, and he was lost. "We will speak later," he said firmly, and crossed the room to claim his lady's hand. Cordelia turned back toward Sebastian and Lady Helena, and found that Sebastian was no longer there. He had extricated himself from Helena's grasp, and was approaching Cordelia with single-minded determination, his grey eyes fixed on her face. "Lady Cordelia." His voice was low, rough around the edges in a way she had never heard before. "May I escort you in to dinner?" She should refuse. She should make him work for her attention, punish him for 11 days of silence, and the spectacle of Helena's proprietary touch on his arm. But when she looked into his eyes and saw the uncertainty flickering beneath his careful control, she could not bring herself to turn him away. "You may." They went in to dinner together, and if Lady Helena's smile turned brittle at the sight of them, Cordelia refused to feel guilty about it. The following days passed in a blur of social activity and stolen moments. Cordelia and Sebastian walked together in the gardens, their conversation careful and superficial. They partnered at whist, their communication wordless but perfectly synchronized. They rode out with the other guests to view the picturesque ruins of an old abbey, Sebastian lifting Cordelia from her horse with hands that lingered perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. Through it all, Lady Helena watched and waited. She was never far from Sebastian's side, appearing at his elbow whenever Cordelia turned away, engaging him in conversation about their shared past, dropping reminders of their former intimacy in honeyed tones. Sebastian endured her attention with visible strain, extricating himself at every opportunity, but Helena was persistent and well practiced in the art of social manoeuvring. On the third night, after a particularly trying dinner, during which Helena had reminisced loudly about a house party they had once attended together, Cordelia escaped to the moonlit terrace with her nerves stretched to their breaking point. Sebastian found her there, as she had somehow known he would. "She means nothing to me." His voice came from the shadows behind her, rough and tired. "Helena, you must believe that." Cordelia did not turn around. "Must I? I know how it must look. I know she has been persistent. But I feel nothing for her, Cordelia. Nothing except contempt for what she did, and relief that I discovered her true nature before it was too late. And yet she seems very certain of her reception." Sebastian moved to stand beside her at the balustrade, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, but not quite touching. In the moonlight, his face was all angles and shadows, his grey eyes almost silver. "Helena is certain of many things that are not true. She believes that money and beauty are sufficient to overcome any obstacle, that my pride can be purchased as easily as a new bonnet, that I have been pining for her these past 3 years, and will fall gratefully into her arms now that she deigns to notice me again." His voice hardened. "She is wrong on all counts." "Then why—" Cordelia stopped, frustration making her reckless. "Why did you run away to Hampshire? Why 11 days of silence? Why have you spent this entire house party treating me like a stranger you are obligated to be polite to?" Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I am afraid." "You said that before. You said—" "I know what I said." He turned to face her fully, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Vulnerability. Raw, unguarded vulnerability. The kind he had spent years learning to hide. "I told you I was afraid, and then I fled to Hampshire like a coward, because I could not bear to look you in the eye and admit what I was afraid of." "And what are you afraid of, Sebastian?" He reached out and took her hand, his fingers trembling slightly as they closed around hers. "I am afraid of how much I love you. I am afraid that if I allow myself to feel it fully, to speak it aloud, you will have the power to destroy me the way Helena did, only worse. Because what I felt for her was nothing compared to what I feel for you." Cordelia's heart stopped. "Sebastian, I love you." The words emerged as if torn from him, ragged and desperate and utterly sincere. "I have loved you since the first time we danced. When you told me my reputation for coldness was almost certainly exaggerated because truly cold people did not bother to ensure their partners were comfortable. I have loved you through every conversation about crop rotation and tenancy agreements, through every awkward silence I did not know how to fill, through every moment I wanted to kiss you, and did not because I was terrified of what would happen if I let myself. Why did you never— because I am a coward." His grip on her hand tightened.
because I had convinced myself that a practical arrangement was safer than love, that if I never admitted how I felt, you could never use it against me. I watched Helena smile at me across the ballroom tonight, and I realized how monstrously unfair I have been to you, making you doubt, making you wonder, making you offer to return my ring, because I had given you no reason to believe it meant anything more than a transaction. Tears were streaming down Cordelia's face, but she did not care. I heard you talking to Lord Dashwood at the Hartwell ball. You said our engagement was exactly what you required, and I was lying. To him, to myself, to anyone who would listen. Sebastian raised his free hand and cupped her cheek, brushing away her tears with his thumb. You are not what I required, Cordelia. You are what I need, what I want, what I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve, if you will give me the chance. She kissed him. It was not a proper kiss, not the chaste brush of lips that an engaged couple might exchange under the watchful eyes of society. It was desperate and consuming, 3 months of suppressed longing finally given voice. Sebastian's arms came around her waist, pulling her close, and she felt his heart pounding against her chest as fiercely as her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers, and his eyes were bright with something that looked remarkably like joy. "Does this mean you forgive me?" Cordelia laughed, a sound that was half sob. "It means I love you too, you impossible man. I have loved you for months, and I tried so hard not to because I thought—" "I know what you thought. I gave you every reason to think it." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. "I am so sorry, Cordelia. I will spend the rest of our lives making it up to you, I swear." "A lifetime of apologies might suffice," she said, smiling through her tears. "But I should warn you I have very high standards." "I would expect nothing less from the woman I love." They stood together in the moonlight, wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time in months, Cordelia felt the weight of uncertainty lift from her shoulders. He loved her. Sebastian Ashworth, Earl of Thornbury, the cold and untouchable man who had built walls around his heart, he loved her. The terrace door opened behind them. How touching! Lady Helena stood silhouetted in the doorway, her beautiful face twisted with something ugly. The proud Lady Cordelia and the grieving Earl, finally united in their grand passion. How romantic, how nauseating! Sebastian released Cordelia and stepped in front of her, his body shielding her from Helena's malice. "You should go back inside, Helena. This conversation does not concern you." "Doesn't it?" Helena stepped onto the terrace, her pale gown glowing in the moonlight like a ghost's. "I should think it concerns me very much, considering that you were mine long before this provincial nobody caught your eye." "I was never yours. I was a prize you wanted, nothing more, and when the prize turned out to be worth less than you had calculated, you discarded me without a second thought." "I made a mistake." Helena's voice softened, became cajoling. "Surely you can forgive a mistake, Sebastian. We could have been magnificent together." "We still could be. My husband left me everything. I am one of the wealthiest women in England now. Think of what we could accomplish with my fortune and your title. Think of the life we could build." Sebastian's voice was ice. "The only life I want to build is with Cordelia. The only future I can imagine is one with her beside me. You are nothing to me, Helena less than nothing. You are a cautionary tale I tell myself when I am tempted to hide behind walls, rather than risking my heart." Helena's composure cracked. "You cannot be serious. This woman, this daughter of a penniless viscount, you would choose her over me?" "I would choose her over anyone." Sebastian reached back and took Cordelia's hand, lacing his fingers through hers.
She is worth more than you could ever understand, more than your fortune, more than your beauty, more than anything in this world." For a moment, Helena stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and wounded pride. Then her expression hardened into something venomous. "You will regret this," she said quietly, "both of you. Society does not forget, and I have many friends who will be only too happy to remind everyone of your inadequacies. The cold earl and his impoverished bride, what a pathetic pair you make." She turned on her heel and swept back into the house, the terrace door slamming behind her with a sound like a thunderclap. Cordelia released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Well, that was bracing. Sebastian pulled her close again, his arms wrapping around her as if he feared she might disappear. "I am sorry. I am sorry she is here. Sorry she said those things. Sorry that I ever gave her reason to believe—" "Hush." Cordelia placed her fingers over his lips, silencing him. "She does not matter. She never did. What matters is us, here, now." "And tomorrow?" His eyes searched her face. "And all the tomorrows after that?" "All of them." She smiled up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. "Every single one. I am not going anywhere, Sebastian. You are stuck with me now." "That," he said solemnly, "is exactly what I was hoping you would say." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a confession. And when they finally parted, Cordelia felt something settle into place in her chest, not just love, but certainty, peace, the knowledge that whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them together. The terrace door opened again, and they both tensed, expecting Helena's return. But it was Thomas who appeared, his face pale and his expression urgent. "Cordelia, Sebastian, you need to come inside right away." "What is it?" Sebastian demanded. "What has happened?" Thomas swallowed hard. "It's Miss Finch. She has received word from London her father has died. She is asking for Cordelia." The peace shattered as quickly as it had formed. Cordelia gathered her skirts and hurried toward the door, Sebastian close behind her, their moment of stolen joy already fading into the shadows. There would be time for love later, she told herself. Time for promises and plans, and the future they had only just begun to imagine. First there was duty. First there was grief. First there was Arabella. Arabella sat crumpled in a chair by the window, her golden curls dishevelled, and her blue eyes swollen with weeping. The letter that had shattered her world lay discarded on the floor, its edges already crumpled from being read and reread in desperate hope that the words might somehow change. Cordelia knelt beside her cousin and gathered her into her arms, letting the girl sob against her shoulder while murmuring the meaningless comforts that grief demands. Thomas hovered in the doorway, his face stricken with helplessness, while Sebastian stood behind him with an expression that suggested he would have preferred to face a battalion of French soldiers rather than a weeping young woman. "He cannot be gone," Arabella gasped between sobs. "I just received a letter from him last week. He said he was feeling better, that the physician had given him hope." "I know, darling, I know." Cordelia stroked her cousin's hair, her own heart aching with remembered grief. She knew too well what it was to lose a father, to have the foundation of your world crumble without warning. These things sometimes happen very quickly. There is no way to prepare. "But I was not there. I was here, dancing and laughing and—" Arabella's voice broke. "I should have been with him. He died alone, Cordelia. My father died alone. He had servants who cared for him. He had friends nearby. He was not alone. Even as she spoke the words, Cordelia was not certain they were true. Mr. Finch had been a solitary man since his wife's death, devoted to his daughter, but uncomfortable in company. The thought of him dying without family at his bedside was almost unbearable. "I need to go home." Arabella pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand in a childlike gesture that made her look even younger than her 17 years. "I need to see him, to arrange things. There will be so much to arrange. Of course, we will leave first thing in the morning. I want to leave now. It is nearly midnight, darling. The horses are stabled, the coachmen are abed." "Then I will walk." Arabella stood abruptly, swaying on her feet. "I will walk to London if I must. I cannot stay here another moment, pretending that everything is normal when my father is when he is." She collapsed into fresh sobs, and Cordelia caught her before she could fall. Thomas was at their side in an instant, his strong arms supporting Arabella's slight frame. "Let me help," he said quietly. "Let me take her to her room. She needs rest, even if she cannot sleep." Cordelia hesitated, looking between her cousin and the young man who loved her. It was improper for Thomas to enter Arabella's bedchamber, scandalous even under these circumstances, but there was nothing improper in his eyes. Only tenderness and a desperate desire to ease her pain. "Stay with her until her maid arrives," Cordelia said finally. "No longer." Thomas nodded and guided Arabella toward the door, one arm around her waist to keep her upright. As they passed Sebastian, the brothers exchanged a look that communicated more than words could convey: understanding, support, the unspoken bonds of family. Then they were gone, and Cordelia was alone with Sebastian. "Your cousin will need you in the coming weeks," he said quietly. "Perhaps longer. Grief is not something that resolves quickly." "I know." Cordelia sank into the chair Arabella had vacated, suddenly exhausted. "I remember what it was like when my father died. The world simply stopped making sense. Everything I thought I understood about my life, my future, my place in the world, all of it changed overnight." Sebastian crossed the room and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "If you need to postpone the wedding—" "No." The word came out more forcefully than she intended. "I mean, we should discuss it, of course. Consider what is appropriate given the circumstances. But I do not want to postpone, Sebastian. I have spent too long waiting, doubting, wondering if we would ever reach this point. I do not want to wait any longer. Nor do I." He raised her hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "But Arabella is your family. Her needs must come first." "They will. We will take her home tomorrow, help her through the funeral, ensure she is settled and supported. And then—" Cordelia paused, struck by a sudden thought. "Where will she live? Her father's house was rented, I think. She has no other family except me and my mother." "Then she will live with us." Sebastian spoke as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Thornbury Manor has more than enough room, and Thomas will want her nearby. We can give her a proper season next year if she wishes, or she can simply stay as long as she needs to heal." Cordelia stared at him, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "You would do that? Take in a grieving girl you have known for only a few months? She is your family. That makes her mine." Sebastian's grey eyes were soft in the candlelight. "Besides, I rather like Miss Finch. She has a good heart, and she makes my brother happy. 2 excellent recommendations in my book." Cordelia leaned forward and kissed him, a gentle brush of lips that conveyed more than words ever could. When she pulled back, Sebastian's expression was wondering, almost dazed. "What was that for?" for being exactly the man I always hoped you were, for proving that the cold Earl of Thornbury was never more than a mask. She touched his cheek, tracing the line of his jaw. For loving me, even when I was too afraid to see it. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it again. He turned his head and pressed a kiss to her palm. Now, you should rest. Tomorrow will be difficult, and Arabella will need your strength. And you? What will you do? I will make arrangements for our departure. Speak to Lady Hartwell. Ensure our carriages are ready at first light. He rose, pulling her to her feet. Go to bed, Cordelia. I will handle everything else. She allowed him to escort her to her chamber door, where propriety demanded they part ways. But before she could slip inside, Sebastian caught her hand one last time. I love you, he said quietly. I know I should have said it months ago, should have said it every day since we met. But I am saying it now, and I will keep saying it until you are thoroughly tired of hearing it. I will never be tired of hearing it. Then I will say it forever. He kissed her forehead, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. Good night, my love. I will see you in the morning. He walked away down the corridor, and Cordelia watched until he disappeared around the corner before finally entering her room and closing the door behind her. Her maid was waiting to help her undress, but Cordelia barely noticed the familiar rituals of removing pins and unlacing stays. Her mind was filled with Sebastian's words, his touch, the wonder of knowing that he loved her as desperately as she loved him. And beneath that wonder, the shadow of grief for Arabella, for Mr. Finch, for all the losses that life inevitably brought. She fell asleep with tears drying on her cheeks, and Sebastian's ring warm against her heart. The weeks that followed were a blur of black crepe and condolence calls, of funeral arrangements and legal consultations, of holding Arabella's hand while she wept, and then weeping herself when she was finally alone. Mr. Finch's affairs proved to be in better order than anyone had expected. He had made careful provisions for his daughter, leaving her a modest income that would not make her wealthy, but would ensure she never wanted for necessities. More importantly, he had left a private message to Arabella that she did not share with anyone, but that seemed to bring her some measure of peace. He knew, she told Cordelia one evening, a month after the funeral. They were sitting in the small parlour of the Blackwood townhouse, where Arabella had been staying while arrangements were made for her future. He knew he was dying. The letter said he had hidden it from me because he wanted my final memories of him to be happy ones, not shadowed by grief. That sounds like your father. He also said... Arabella hesitated, her cheeks flushing. He said he had met Mr. Ashworth when Thomas called on him to ask permission to court me. He said he approved, and that if Thomas should ever propose, I should not feel obligated to refuse on account of mourning. Cordelia felt a smile tug at her lips despite the solemnity of the moment. Your father was a wise man. He wanted me to be happy. Arabella's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were different from the desperate sobs of those first terrible days. There was acceptance in them now, the beginning of healing. He wanted me to live my life fully, even after he was gone. He said that grief should not become a prison. He was right. Cordelia took her cousin's hand. And neither is Lord Thornbury. Arabella managed a watery smile. I know you have been postponing your wedding on my account. Please do not wait any longer. I could not bear to think that my grief was preventing your joy. Our wedding can wait. No, it cannot. Arabella's voice was surprisingly firm. You have waited long enough. Both of you have. Marry him, Cordelia. Marry him and be happy, and let me see that love can triumph over loss. That would be the greatest comfort you could give me. Cordelia studied her cousin's face, looking for signs of forced bravery or hidden distress. But all she saw was genuine conviction, and the first glimmers of the bright spirit that grief had temporarily dimmed. "Are you certain?" "Completely certain." Arabella squeezed her hand. "Besides, if you marry Lord Thornbury, Thomas will have an excuse to call every day. That alone is reason enough to proceed." Cordelia laughed, a sound that felt strange after so many weeks of hushed voices and solemn expressions. "Very well, if you insist." "I do insist, and I expect to be involved in every detail of the planning, so do not think you can exclude me on account of mourning. I may be wearing black, but I can still have opinions about flowers and music and what you should wear." "I would not dream of excluding you." They embraced, and Cordelia felt something ease in her chest, the guilt she had been carrying for finding happiness while Arabella suffered, the fear that joy and grief could not coexist. They could. They did. Life was large enough to contain both. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, on a crisp September morning that smelled of autumn leaves and new beginnings. Cordelia had insisted on a small ceremony, family and close friends only, no elaborate society spectacle to be dissected in the gossip columns. Sebastian had agreed with visible relief, confessing that he had dreaded the prospect of exchanging vows in front of 300 witnesses who were more interested in scandal than celebration. So they married in the chapel at Thornbury Manor, the Ashworth family seat in Hampshire that Sebastian had spent years restoring to its former glory. The stone walls were hung with white roses from the garden, and the morning light streamed through stained glass windows that had witnessed centuries of family weddings. Cordelia walked down the aisle on her mother's arm, an unconventional choice, but there was no one else she wanted beside her for this moment. Lady Blackwood wept openly, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks as she delivered her daughter to the man who would become her husband. Sebastian waited at the altar with Thomas at his side, both brothers looking handsome and slightly nervous in their formal attire. But when Sebastian's eyes met Cordelia's, his expression transformed, the nervousness melting away, replaced by such naked love and wonder that she felt her own eyes filling with tears. He loved her. After everything they had endured, the misunderstandings, the fear, the public humiliation, the weeks of grief and uncertainty, he loved her. And she loved him with a ferocity that still took her breath away. The ceremony was brief and beautiful, the ancient words taking on new meaning as they spoke them to each other. When the vicar asked if she took this man to be her lawfully wedded husband, Cordelia's voice rang clear and strong through the chapel. "I do." And when Sebastian slid the wedding band onto her finger, next to the sapphire she had once tried to return, his hands were steady and his smile was radiant. "With this ring I thee wed," he said quietly, "and with all that I am, I thee honour, from this day forward, until death do us part." The vicar pronounced them husband and wife, and Sebastian kissed her with such tenderness that Cordelia forgot there was anyone else in the chapel at all. They were married. After everything, they were finally married. The wedding breakfast was held in the great hall of Thornbury Manor, a magnificent room with soaring ceilings and massive windows overlooking the gardens. The guests, perhaps 30 in all, gathered around a long table laden with every delicacy the kitchen could produce, while servants circulated with champagne and the morning sunlight made everything golden. Thomas gave a toast that made everyone laugh and Arabella blush. Lady Blackwood gave a toast that made everyone cry, and Sebastian, who had never been known for public speaking, stood and said simply that he was the luckiest man in England, and that he intended to spend the rest of his life being worthy of the woman who had agreed to marry him despite his many flaws. Cordelia's response was to pull him down into his chair and kiss him soundly, which earned a round of applause and a scandalized gasp from one elderly aunt. By mid-afternoon, the guests had begun to depart, carriages rolling away down the long drive toward the main road. Thomas lingered to say goodbye to Arabella, their farewells stretching into a walk in the garden that no one commented on, despite its impropriety. Lady Blackwood retired to her room for a rest, exhausted by emotion and champagne in equal measure. And finally, Cordelia and Sebastian were alone. They stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens, the September breeze carrying the scent of roses and the distant sound of birdsong. Cordelia leaned against her husband's side. Her husband, she could call him that now, and felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you thinking?" Sebastian asked, his arm tightening around her waist. "I am thinking that I nearly threw this away." She turned to face him, her green eyes searching his grey ones. "That night at the Hartwell ball, when I tried to return your ring, I was so certain that I was doing the right thing, so convinced that you could never love me, that our marriage would be nothing but cold convenience. I should have given you reason to believe otherwise. I should have spoken months ago, instead of hiding behind walls like a coward. We were both cowards." She reached up and touched his face, tracing the lines around his eyes that softened when he smiled. "Both of us so afraid of being hurt that we nearly destroyed the best thing either of us had ever known. But we did not destroy it." Sebastian captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "We are here, together, married. Whatever mistakes we made, they led us to this moment." "This moment," Cordelia repeated. "And all the moments after. A lifetime of moments." "A lifetime," he agreed. "I intend to make every single one count." He kissed her then, there on the terrace in full view of anyone who might be watching, and Cordelia kissed him back with all the passion and promise that the future held. 8 years later. The summer sun hung low over the Hampshire hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose as twilight approached. From her seat in the garden, Cordelia could hear the shrieks of laughter from the lawn, where her twin sons were engaged in some elaborate game involving wooden swords and an increasingly patient nursemaid. Edward and William, 6 years old and identical in appearance, if not in temperament, had inherited their father's dark hair and their mother's green eyes. Edward was the serious one, already showing signs of the analytical mind that would one day make him an excellent earl. William was wild and adventurous, forever climbing trees and making mischief, testing the limits of every rule. Cordelia loved them both with a fierceness that still surprised her, even after 6 years of motherhood. "Mama! Mama, look!" She turned to see her daughter toddling across the grass, chubby legs pumping with determination, a crown of wilted daisies askew on her auburn curls. Charlotte was 3 years old, and the undisputed queen of Thornbury Manor, ruling over parents, brothers, and servants alike, with a charming combination of sweet smiles and iron will. "What a beautiful crown, darling." Cordelia caught her daughter as she stumbled the last few steps, sweeping her up into a lap that was growing round with the promise of another child. "Did you make it yourself?" "Uncle Thomas helped." Charlotte snuggled against her mother's chest, her thumb finding its way to her mouth. "He said it was fit for a princess." "Uncle Thomas is very wise." From across the garden, Thomas waved, his own brood of children, 3 at last count, with a 4th on the way tumbling around him like puppies. Arabella sat nearby under a parasol, her golden hair faded only slightly by the years, her belly swelling with new life, even as she laughed at something her husband had said. They visited often, Thomas and Arabella, bringing their chaos and their joy to fill the halls of Thornbury Manor. The cousins played together, fought together, loved together, a new generation of Ashworths and Finches intertwined as closely as their parents had become. "She is asleep." Sebastian's voice came from behind her, quiet so as not to disturb the child in her arms. Cordelia looked up to find her husband approaching across the lawn, his coat discarded somewhere inside, his cravat loosened, looking nothing at all like the cold earl she had first met 9 years ago. She was exhausted from terrorizing her brothers. Cordelia shifted Charlotte gently, making room for Sebastian to sit beside her on the garden bench. I believe she declared herself queen of the nursery and demanded tribute in the form of biscuits. That sounds about right. Sebastian settled beside her, his arm coming around her shoulders with the ease of long familiarity. She will be a formidable woman some day. She already is a formidable woman. She is merely small. Sebastian laughed, the sound warm and unreserved in a way that still made Cordelia's heart flutter. He laughed often now at his children's antics, at Thomas's terrible jokes, at the small absurdities of daily life. The walls he had built around himself had crumbled long ago, replaced by something softer and infinitely more beautiful. They sat together as the sun sank toward the horizon, watching their sons play and their daughters sleep, listening to the distant sounds of family and friendship. Cordelia leaned her head against Sebastian's shoulder and felt the baby, the bum, inside her shift and kick, a reminder of the future still unfolding. "Do you remember," Sebastian said quietly, "when you tried to give back my ring?" Cordelia smiled. "I remember you refusing to take it. It was the most terrifying moment of my life." He turned to look at her, his grey eyes soft in the fading light. "I thought I had lost you. I thought my own foolish pride had driven you away forever." "But you put the ring back on my finger." "I could not let you go. Even then, when I had not yet found the courage to tell you how I felt, I knew that losing you would destroy me." He lifted her hand, the sapphire engagement ring glinting beside the simple gold band that marked their marriage. "You have worn it every day for 8 years." "I have." She turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. "And I will wear it for 8 more, and 8 more after that. For as long as I live." Sebastian raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to the sapphire, then to her wedding ring, then to her palm. "I love you, Cordelia Ashworth. More today than yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow." "That is rather poetic for a man who once claimed to have no romantic sentiments. You have ruined me completely." He grinned, looking young and carefree in a way that still delighted her. "I am now hopelessly romantic and entirely devoted to my wife. Society would be scandalized if they knew." "Let them be scandalized." She leaned up and kissed him, soft and sweet, mindful of the sleeping child between them. "I rather like you this way." "Good, because I have no intention of changing." The sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in colors too beautiful for words. In the distance the twins finally surrendered to their nursemaid's authority and began the reluctant trek back to the house for supper and baths. Thomas scooped up his own children, Arabella laughing as she struggled to rise from her chair with her pregnant belly. Soon the garden would be empty, the day would be done, and the family would gather in the great hall for dinner, as they did every night when Thomas and Arabella visited. There would be noise and chaos, spilled drinks and arguments over who got the last tart, the comfortable disorder of a house full of love. But for now, in this moment, there was only the 3 of them, Cordelia and Sebastian, and their sleeping daughter, and the profound peace of knowing that they had found each other against all odds. Cordelia touched the ring on her finger, remembering the night she had tried to return it. How desperately unhappy she had been then, how convinced that love was beyond her reach. And now here she was, surrounded by more love than she had ever dared to imagine, building a life with the man who had refused to let her go. "Thank you," she said quietly. Sebastian looked at her curiously. "For what?" "For putting the ring back on my finger, for not accepting my surrender, for being stubborn enough to fight for us when I was too
afraid to fight for myself. You would have fought eventually. He smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. You are not the surrendering type, Cordelia. You never have been.
Perhaps not. But you made it easier. You made me believe that I was worth fighting for. You are worth everything. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Everything I have, everything I am, everything I will ever be. It all belongs to you. Charlotte stirred in her arms, murmuring something unintelligible before settling back into sleep. From the house came the sound of the dinner gong summoning them inside. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, and somewhere nearby a nightingale began to sing. Cordelia looked up at her husband, at the love shining in his eyes, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude for the life they had built together. "Shall we go in?" she asked. "In a moment." Sebastian pulled her closer, careful not to wake Charlotte. "I want to remember this. You, me, our daughter, this perfect evening. I want to hold on to it forever." "We have forever," she reminded him, "or as close to forever as anyone gets. Then I want to hold on to every moment of it." He kissed her one last time, lingering and tender. "Starting with this one." They sat together in the gathering dusk, watching the stars emerge one by one, until finally Charlotte stirred and demanded to be taken inside for supper. Sebastian carried their daughter, while Cordelia walked beside him, her hand resting on the swell of her belly where their fourth child grew. Behind them, the garden faded into shadow. Ahead, the windows of Thornbury Manor glowed with warmth and welcome, the sounds of family spilling out into the night. Cordelia Ashworth, Countess of Thornbury, climbed the terrace steps and entered the home she had never expected to have, surrounded by the love she had never believed she deserved. She had tried to give back the ring once, convinced that happiness was not meant for her. She had never been more grateful to be wrong.